Good morning and welcome to this morning's global webinar presented by the OWASP Foundation. We're happy to have Ken Johnson here to talk to us about RailsGoat. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Ken.
Morning, everyone. Admittedly, this is a bit of a strange format to give a presentation. And somehow, oddly enough, I'm still a little nervous, even over a webinar. But anyways, so this topic is the topic we're covering, RailsGoat. Basically, this is a project that was developed to provide open source and free training to Rails developers. There's been some hard work on it by a few individuals, and I guess we'll jump right in. After each slide, I will pause for questions, and this presentation is not incredibly long, so we do have time for a deep dive into the code if anybody wants to go into it. So, all right. So this is a RailsGoat is a purposefully vulnerable Rails application. It's kind of important to say purposefully, I feel anyways. It covers right now the OWASP top 10. 2013 is on the roadmap, and it's something that is actually being worked on right now on GitHub. So if you visit the GitHub page, you'll see that there is a 2013 branch. It's built for realism and scalability. So the premise is that this is an HR or human resources application. When I say scalability, I mean that the models they are built to be extended. We use associations between a user and each one of these sections, whether it be performance or benefit related. It's incredibly easy to extend and scale. So I bring that up. Obviously we're looking for more folks to contribute, so that's why I bring it up. So to get started, I mentioned it's hosted on GitHub. There is a home page. Don't feel the need to copy the link now. I believe this presentation is going to be distributed, so you'll be able to get the link later. But that is the homepage. The official homepage is through OWASP, but I need a little bit more flexibility. So there's a GitHub page that is the unofficial homepage. The last thing is the reason we chose GitHub was specifically for collaboration. So issue tracking, submitting pull requests, forking and submitting pull requests. Trying to make this something that is a community project. So roadmap items, things that are coming up. So as I mentioned, we're converting to the OWASP top 10 2013. Unit testing, Mike McCabe, at the end of the presentation, I'll give you his Twitter handle if you wanted to reach out to him. But there are two different unit testing efforts underway. One is security-focused RSpec unit testing, and the other is Gauntlet, which is a rugged testing framework. They call it a rugged testing framework due to the fact I think the actual mantra is beaming your code. But anyway, so that's something Mike's working on, including in the framework or in the application. The vulnerable gems, there's been a request for us to include gems that are currently vulnerable and also ones that are a little bit outdated, just to show previous issues with things like authorization and command injection and things like that. And then, of course, they're going to add more vulnerabilities. Before I move forward, I went over a lot in that slide. Does anybody have any questions?
No questions.
Okay. So when I say more vulnerabilities, what I mean is right now we felt like the immediate need was to get training out there for maybe the more novice programming crowd and novice to moderate, and then the same goes for the security side of it and testing and reviewing code. So that was our primary focus out front. Now we're starting to shift into the more moderate to advanced tutorials. So this is something that's going to happen over the course of the next probably 3 months, where there are going to be things that maybe are going to be a little bit more subtle. And if you look at the tutorials as they are right now, some of these vulnerabilities scream, you know, look at me, I'm obvious. But there will be some changes there. So Rails-specific vulnerabilities outside of the top 10. The top 10 is a great framework for making sure we have sort of a basic coverage of, you know, vulnerabilities and how they manifest in the Rails framework. But it's not all inclusive, obviously, and there are things that fall outside the scope of that are Rails specific, and we want to make sure get into the framework. And then metaprogramming vulnerabilities. So there are obviously some ways to shoot yourself in the foot when it comes to including dynamic user supplied content into metaprogramming code. So those things are going to be covered as part of the moderate to advanced tutorials. And the last thing is added functionality. Right now the functionality is actually fairly, you know, it's very basic. As I said, it's extensible, so you'll see that the application grow in terms of just pure functionality. So before I move on to the next slide, does anyone have any questions?
Nope.
All right. This may be a very quick presentation. All right, so Rails versions. Right now, the branch is locked in at 3. The application uses Rails 3. We plan to, I'm actually, to be quite honest, I'm not sure if I'm going to go with Rails 2X or Rails 4 next. It might seem like it makes sense to go after Rails 4, but I know that there's a much larger group of folks out there using Rails 2 still, just because, you know, it was something built initially during the startup phase, and then the company grew, and then it just kind of got bigger and bigger, and now it's hard to upgrade. And so, you know, I see the scenario play out quite a bit. So I'm actually thinking about moving, and Mike and I are discussing this, moving forward with Rails 2 first, and then coming back and doing Rails 4. But there are vulnerabilities that are unique to each framework. Anybody that's developed in those frameworks understands that. So we want to show the vulnerabilities as they manifest within each Rails version. So support. All of Unix, obviously, in Linux, we don't have Windows support. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure we will ever support Windows or put any effort into that. Maybe someday, but it's certainly not a priority right now. Any questions so far?
No. I noticed Mike McCabe is also on the webinar, and I'd be happy to unmute him if he has anything he'd like to.
Yeah, actually, Mike, yeah, let's do that. Let's see if Mike has anything to add.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Sorry if it's a little loud. I'm in the office. One thing that might make this a little easier is we're looking to add the ability to use Vagrant to build an environment with Rails RailsGoat already set up. So instead of needing to have MySQL installed, have all the other dependencies installed, you would just basically download a virtual machine with everything already built into it, which would make getting started a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point that Mike brings up. We should definitely make it possible to integrate with Vagrant. And actually, I think ideally we would probably do something like make it easier to get up into the an Elastic Beanstalk instance or something like that. I'm sure we can figure something out. Or maybe just provide tutorials on that, because I know that there's some learning curve there. What do you think about that, Mike? Also, getting it for the prepared for the cloud, whether it be tutorials or whatever.
Yeah, that's an idea. We could even probably create an AWS image.
Yeah. So there's some ideas to throw out there to make this easier. Put that on the roadmap. All right, so I guess I'll just move forward with actually showing you two vulnerabilities that I thought were maybe somewhat interesting. So to preface this video, essentially we talk about securing your application against timing attacks. So there's this this is for folks that roll their own authentication, is what I should say. So when you do that, there can be a tendency to first, for instance, look up the user, and then if they're, if they exist in the system, then perform some functionality or execute some code. That's a mistake. It's an issue with timing attacks. So we're going to show basically uncommenting the more secure version of rolling our own authentication, commenting out the old one, and I'll walk you through what exactly the code is doing. So let's see here. So this is our baseline authentication method. It's kind of kludgy. It says, you see user equals find by email. So we look up the user by the email they provided us when they're attempting to log in. If the email doesn't exist, we tell them that it doesn't exist. That's obviously a blatant foul there, where we're basically allowing user enumeration. And then we perform a compare function on the user's password. So if the user was found, we take their password and we compare it against a poorly, so we use MD5, and that's obviously not the preferred hashing function for their password, but that's what the application uses. So we perform that compare function, and then we return the result if there's a true, or if there's a match on the user's password and the hash password. So that they've provided, I should say. Sorry. So to shore this up, there's a few things wrong with this. Obviously, even if we got rid of the fact that we say whether or not it's an incorrect email or whether or not it's an incorrect password, even if it's a generic error, we'd still have an issue, because you'll notice we only sort of do the compare there if the user exists. So let's say where it says raise email doesn't exist, we have email or password, there's something wrong with it. Because we have this if we were, because we have that raise statement, we wouldn't go to the next line and execute that comparison. So, all right, I'm going to try and get that to go away. All right. So after we uncomment this, and by the way, the point of showing you the comment and uncomment is that throughout the code, this is done. There are in some cases there's just flat out, this is bad code, this is what we're using. Second, then there's the second tier up, a little bit more secure example, and then the last one is more advanced, where it says, hey, this is the most secure code or method that you could create. And I can't say that it does that everywhere, but in the majority of the application that exists. So you can always uncomment, comment at will. So now the self-authenticate method belongs to, that's this method that's actually being used now. So what you'll notice is the first thing we do is you do user equals find by email, and we say or the user dot, we create a user with a blank password. So what ends up happening is, to go through this, basically if there's no user return from the system because the email you provided when you're attempting to log in doesn't exist in the system, the statement to the right of it will execute. Right? So regardless, there will be a user object, whether or not that user exists in the system or whether the user is one you created. By using a blank password, when we go to the next line where it says if rack-utils.secure compare, and we use the user password, either the user we found in the system or the user we created, and we compare that against the password provided at login, the MD5 hash version of that. The MD5 hash version of an empty string is still an MD5 hash, so it will never match it, right? So I guess what I'm saying is this password. Now the caveat there is if we had, for folks a little bit more into or familiar with Rails, if we had some kind of before save function where we did a user.new password and then, we had a on create type filter in there, and it basically hashed the blank password, that might be an issue. But here, all we're doing is create just a user user object in memory, no actual creation. And so basically, right off the bat, we know that that even if there should never be a match for that user we created in memory. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. So the secure compare is a feature of rack-utils. I can actually pull that up real quick. So basically what it does is it takes the value that you've provided, it breaks it down to byte size, and it compares against byte size. But it'll always return. It'll also basically always take the same amount of processing time to process. So what that means is here there will never be a distinction between how long it takes the application to return a response from a login request. If you provide no user, if you provide a bad password, if you provide an email address that doesn't exist in the system, the timing will always be the same amount of time to respond. So you cannot enumerate whether or not a user exists in this way. It's a more subtle portion of coding in Rails that is often done incorrectly. So before I move on, are there any questions? I'd be surprised if there weren't any questions on that one.
No, there are not.
All right, guys, you're killing me. Somebody's got to have a question here. that was not the, I know that I probably didn't make that super clear, so although I tried. This is a really weird format, so you know, if I'm screwing it up, I can't look at your faces and know, so just you know, shoot questions out there. That's the only way I can do it. But if nobody has anything else, let me hop back open that presentation. Sorry, I guess somehow I closed that. All right, so the next video is probably just a little bit easier to cover for me anyways, from this side of things. So what we're going to show here is, so before I start the video, if I can figure out how to zoom in, there we go. Before I start the video, what I want to explain is the basic premise of this is that we have a file that we're going to download. We instantiate, so the way we do this is actually insecure. It's insecure from two aspects. From what the first aspect is that, you know, when you go to retrieve that file, we're going to basically use your user input to retrieve that file. The second part of this, which is the part that this particular video probably doesn't go into as much, but will be covered in the more moderate to advanced tutorials, is the metaprogramming aspect. There's a method used in this call called that's dubbed constant tides. That's a Rails method, and basically you can create a constant or a class from a string. So I'm going to dig right in, and then I'll explain a little bit of that as we go on. So first we navigate to the benefit forms. Sorry, actually first we take a look at the code. The first line here basically says that under the Rails application, there's a public, public /docs folder. Whatever parameter, or the name parameter that you provide to the application, whatever you've given in that parameter is what we expect. It's going to be part of that path, right? So it's going to be the Rails path plus the public folder plus the docs folder, and then whatever the file name you give. That's kind of the idea of what that should be. The file equals line. Now this is something that's really not explained too well in this tutorial, but will be. But basically we're taking user parameter, user supplied content from this parameter, this type parameter, and then we're calling constant size on it, which basically is a separate vulnerability in and of itself. So we're creating a class from user supplied content with no protection, no filtering that, you know, the user supplied input equals this or that. Just any class you want to constant size now, you can. So that's an issue. And then when we instantiate that class, we actually pass in user supplied input, which is the result of path on the previous line. The way it's the intended purpose for this code is from, you know, straight up functionality wise, is that the user gives us the file name, we look on the file system, and we return the file object to the user so that they can download a PDF. That's really what the idea is here. So right here, this is the name parameter. Up there you can see, and if you're not familiar with what you're looking at, this is an intercepting proxy. It sits between your browser and the application and can catch requests. You can modify them before forwarding them onto the application. So you can see there's two parameters there, name and type. We discussed both of those. So as we navigate back real quick, if you look at the type parameter in the request that we're sending, it's a capital, it's file. So really what you're saying here, when you say file equals, you're saying file equals file.new, and you're giving it the path parameter. And then the path parameter consists of the public /doc /health and stuff PDF. It's a really classy name I gave that PDF. Couldn't think of anything better. So we're going to replace that though with the location of the config initializer's secret token.rb. If you're not familiar with this file, there are many good reasons to not store your secret token or incredibly sensitive tokens, keys, credentials inside of your source code. It should be a pretty compelling reason. If you're ever able to perform a transaction like this, where you're basically traversing the file system to pull a file that you wanted. And this is kind of a concern that why we try to prevent that and try to omit those from source, and instead call it from maybe an environment variable, but certainly not keep it in the source. So right here we're going to traverse two directories back and go to the config directory, initializers directory, and take this secret token. By the way, did someone have a question or?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, you're doing great.
Okay, so we'll traverse back two directories, grab the, go to the config directory, initializer secret token, and just out of curiosity, can anybody on the line tell me why having a secret token would be important? What I could do with that? Mike, you should at least be able to give me something here. All right. Well, so the secret token basically has this token value inside of it that's used for signing sessions. The way Rails works by default, and you can change this, but by default it stores your cookie on the client side and not the server side. So how that works is your browser just maintains your cookie until expiration. And that cookie has it might have some data in there, like your user ID, or it might have something in there that ties you in the database to that cookie in that session. So that's just by default. And the way it does that is it does that by verifying the message integrity of the cookie. To create that hash, to generate a hash and basically make your cookie, it does so by using this secret token. So if you steal that, what I'm saying is you basically have the ability to assign your own sessions, and that's a pretty powerful thing. You'd be able to become whoever you want on the system, depending on how it's architected, but more often than not, you would be able to become whoever you want on the system. So it's rare that I don't see it set that way. It's great for optimization purposes in terms of storing that cookie on the client, but you have to remember, unless you rotate that secret token, that cookie never really expires. It might, from the user's browser, disappear, but if ever captured, you're not going to be able to invalidate that server side unless you actually rotate that key, that secret token. So that's kind of that's the bad part of storing that cookie on the client. So you don't want this to get out. That's my point. So you can see what we did was we went ahead and retrieved, instead of the health and stuff PDF, we retrieved the secret token. And now with this value, we can go ahead and sign sessions and forge sessions, and maybe change your user ID and the cookie from 4 or 5 or whatever it is to 1 and become admin. So that is the that's part of that. I can minimize or exit. I don't know if I'm that smarter. So this is the part where I kind of again ask if anybody has some questions before I kind of sign off here, and before I give you some information on how to reach us and then sign off. So does anybody have any questions before we do that?
Looks like you've done a great job, Ken.
Sorry, what was that?
I said it looks like you've done a great job explaining all this.
Oh, okay. So no questions, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so my Twitter handle's on there, Mike McCabe, who, if you have any questions, I mean, Mike is doing a lot more work than just unit testing behind the scenes, but, that's, especially if you have those questions, I would direct them at him. I know he loves to answer all your questions and loves that I just said that he wants to answer all your questions. So, but yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, this is going out there so everybody can, go and download the presentation, get the links that they need.
Yeah, the presentation and the slides will be posted, and along with Ken and Mike's contact information and the project page links also. So lots of ways to get follow-up information and reach out to either Ken or Mike in the future when you're working with it and you have some questions then.
Yeah, I mean, there's always Google, so, you Google Rails, you can get involved that way, or find a way to get involved. So yeah, please contribute. That's all I have. I really appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks for joining.